Recording in progress. Oh, Honorable members, I take this opportunity to greet you this morning in the chilly, windy, and snowy conditions of South Africa. We also welcome the staff that is here today and our presenters who have been invited to present from IGD. We welcome those who are joining the proceedings of the Portfolio Committee using various platforms that have been provided by Parliament. Though we have a challenge of most of our Portfolio Committee meetings not being streamed live as regularly as possible, that is being attended to. Lubabalo, can you take us through the apologies?
Good morning, Chair and honorable members. For this meeting, I did not receive any apologies, Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lubabalo. Honorable members, today we are going to be dealing with the fiscal framework in the afternoon at 2:00. We are used to the sitting at 3:00. So the sitting today is 2:00 and it's at the Cape Town International Convention Center, which means that members have to prepare themselves and then get into the buses to travel to the convention center. So we'll not waste time and go directly into today's presentation from the IGD on the Presidency, Foreign Policy in South Africa. And I hope we will not have a very, very long meeting today, honorable members. You are welcome. Over to you, Dineo. If you can please introduce our presenter.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning, Chair and honorable members and our guests. Today, Chair, we have IGD led by Dr. Philani Mthembu, accompanied by Ms. Sanusha Naidu. They are going to be presenting to the committee on the role of the presidency in foreign policy. So, Chairperson, they are already in the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Austinel. Dr. Mthembu and Sanusha, our colleagues, we are always with you. And we like the work that you are doing. We commend you. We'll continue to deepen our relationship as the Portfolio Committee on ourselves. I don't know who's going to start, so I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think what I can do is just start, and then Sanusha can come in on just to elaborate on certain areas, and if there's also areas that I've missed, she can also touch on. Certainly, the presentation will not be too long. But what I would like to sort of state is that what I'm presenting is sort of based on what the Institute normally publishes every 2 to 3 years, which is a South African foreign policy review. So what we normally do is generally review each administration, but also look at the different actors that are involved in setting foreign policy. So we look at Parliament, we look at the role of the presidency, special advisors, and different elements within the state. So what I'll be touching on is essentially some of the key areas around the role of the presidency in foreign policy, but also the importance and sometimes challenges of playing an oversight role when it comes to the presidency and foreign policy. Firstly, touch on the presidential powers in terms of foreign policy. In terms of the South African Constitution, Act 108 of 1996, the president enjoys considerable power in terms of foreign policy decision making, and it's quite a wide range and a wide scope. What's important also is that Section 12A, 1 of the Public Service Act authorizes the appointment of special advisors who essentially are tasked to advise the executive authority. And of course, the appointment of special advisors and the establishment of advisory councils by members of the executive are institutionalized. There are two types of special advisors that are identified. The first one is a formal ad hoc public servants who are appointed by the president and cabinet ministers. And then South Africa, like other countries like the US, but also the UK, has a legislative framework that regulates the formal appointment of special advisors. And that is that Section 12A, 1 of the Public Service Act. Now, the Act itself, it limits the appointment of special advisors to 2 full-time equivalent positions for each minister or premier, but also it does not limit the number of special advisors that the president and the deputy president may appoint. Now, this is important because in recent times, what we have seen is you know, and much has been sort of discussed, debated, and written around it, is what we've seen in recent times is the consolidation of some government work in the presidency's office. We've also seen a growing number of presidential advisory councils, panels, task teams, committees, summits, and commissions. So there are various initiatives that are being driven not only by the line ministries, but are being driven within the office of the presidency. Now, on a certain level, this may be good in elevating the priority areas, but in other areas, it may also limit the possibility of Parliament to play an effective oversight role, especially of the portfolio committee. In terms of parliamentary processes to scrutinize the president and the presidency, both the president and the deputy president, as things stand, appear in the National Assembly chamber to answer oral questions. Now, some of these engagements happen once a quarter, but then there are also avenues through the National Council of Provinces, where the deputy president appears once per term, while the president does so every 6 months. So these are the current processes where Parliament essentially looks to play an oversight role over the presidency. However, much has been raised in recent years about whether these established processes are sufficient to play an oversight role over the work of the presidency, especially in foreign policy, but also in other realms. Taking into account that, generally speaking, foreign policy has been traditionally, not just in South Africa, but in many countries, it's been a realm that has been dominated by the executive branch of government. Now, the various ministers in the presidency, they also appear before both houses, the National Assembly and the National Council on Provinces. They appear generally for oral questions and replies to account for the performance of their respective portfolios. Now, while this is certainly valuable, these plenary appearances do have their limitations. And various political parties have raised the issue that these platforms are unsatisfactory for various reasons, such as the time and question limits, but also their inability to deliver the kind of detailed discussions and scrutiny of legislation and policy that may be required in contemporary times. So there's been a vibrant debate in the past years in South Africa of how to enhance the oversight role of Parliament in terms of the work of the presidency. There's also, of course, the questions that are submitted for written reply. That's another oversight tool that allows members of parliament to submit written questions to the president and the presidency. And these generally look to seek additional information that would otherwise not be readily available. And of course, this tool has been widely used in South Africa, particularly by opposition members of parliament. But even then, despite having this platform, again, the debate has been whether these are sufficient enough to play an oversight role, especially, as I mentioned earlier, when you have a consolidation of certain government functions taking place within the presidency. Some of the challenges in terms of parliamentary oversight of the presidency include, sort of the peculiarities of our parliamentary system, that there really isn't a parliamentary committee that oversees the presidency. At least this has been the case. There's been some recent developments, which I'll come to from 2024. But generally speaking, whilst all the different ministries would normally have a parliamentary committee to oversee their work, the presidency is exempt from that. So every government department is subject to consistent parliamentary oversight. And this is not the case with the presidency. Of course, the argument from the presidency has tended to be that the work of the presidency is dispensed through the different departments and through the different ministries. And therefore, the assumption is that oversight that is taking place in the different ministries, including international relations, is reflective also of oversight work of the presidency. But there has been pushback of whether this is a sufficient rationale. The presidency is essentially then the only department or entity that receives a budget from Parliament, but without sort of detailed, rigorous parliamentary scrutiny by a parliamentary committee. And this has been the discussion, in recent years within South Africa. And that has led to increased calls for the establishment of a specific committee for presidential oversight. And these calls have been growing, largely in the past led by opposition benches. However, in a context of a government of national unity, what we see is that these calls have actually been accentuated, not only by sort of traditional opposition political parties. So you see a growing consensus amongst members of parliament of the need to enhance oversight in terms of the presidency's role in foreign policy, but also in other policy areas. And so what also increased those calls in recent years was also some of the recommendations of the Zondo Commission, which recommended that Parliament should consider whether it would be desirable for it to establish a committee whose function is or includes oversight over acts or omissions by the president and presidency, which are not overseen by existing portfolio committees. To quote former Chief Justice Zondo, he says, a process to enable the president and presidency's conduct to be subjected to more probing scrutiny than is feasible in a plenary session of the National Assembly would therefore appear to be beneficial. So these are some of the dynamics that have enhanced calls for, sort of growing oversight over the functions and the role of the presidency, not only in foreign policy, but also in other areas. In terms of some of the recent developments, late 2024, I guess as a culmination of all of those different debates that have been taking place amongst members of parliament, is that late 2024, during one of the meetings, the National Assembly Rules Committee adopted several new rules and guidelines that aimed at enabling the seventh democratic parliament to perform its duties more effectively, particularly in terms of oversight, in terms of the role of the presidency. And there, amongst the new rules adopted, is that Section 57 of the Constitution provides that the National Assembly may make rules and orders, of course, to regulate its business. And in terms of the National Assembly Rule 193, the Rules Committee is mandated to develop and formulate proposals that concern the exclusive business of the Assembly in respect of various proceedings and functions. National Assembly has also, some of the areas I mentioned before, has various ways of overseeing and holding the executive to account, including questions to the president, the deputy president, the ministers, as well as through the portfolio committees. However, the Rules Committee essentially states that following much deliberation, the committee decided through a vote to mandate the subcommittee to process the establishment of an oversight committee on the presidency. And the subcommittee would then have to consider these modalities of the committee and report back to the Rules Committee. So essentially a decision made that indeed Parliament should go through in terms of establishing a specific subcommittee to play an oversight role over the presidency. Now, these new rules that were adopted will, of course, continue to go through the formal processes and would then need to be adopted by a full sitting of the House before implementation. But it shows that a constant sort of timeline where in the past couple of years, you've had this debate amongst members of parliament, how can we play a stronger oversight role of the presidency? Concurrent to that, you've had certain line functions being centralized within the presidency, and where members of parliament have felt that they are not able to play as robust a role in terms of oversight. And this has culminated in the Rules Committee coming up with this recommendation now to essentially establish a specific subcommittee to play an oversight role over the presidency. I would argue that the conditions of the government of national unity have essentially, or at least as some may call it, sort of the beginning of a potential era in coalition politics in South Africa. This has created also the conditions that for such rules to be adopted. There are case studies in other parts of the world, but generally speaking, South Africa is not necessarily an exception in many countries in the world, this debate also continues to rage, where you have specific subcommittees that are tasked with playing that oversight role over different ministerial line functions, but where they feel at times that they do not have the mechanisms to play an oversight role over the presidency or over prime ministers, particularly. So this is not necessarily that South Africa is an exceptional case. It's something that continues to especially impact international relations, because over the years, generally, as stated before, international relations has been driven by the executive. However, we have seen gradually, I think, what might be called a democratization of international relations amongst many governments around the world. So you're seeing more actors, you're seeing efforts to play a stronger role, especially by parliaments, especially in terms of their oversight role. Some of the sort of comparative examples you could look at, for instance, there's a few equivalents. So for instance, of portfolio or parliamentary committees that question the president, the prime minister, or heads of state. These committees tend to be more pronounced or more popular in sort of Westminster systems. And so the UK comes to mind as an example, where in the UK, you have a liaison committee, which is basically a select committee of the House of Commons. It comprises all MPs who are select committee chairs. And amongst the many varied tasks, the liaison committee, which was established in 2002, has a specific task of taking oral evidence from the Prime Minister 3 times a year. And its aim is to question the Prime Minister about different policy initiatives, to promote effective scrutiny of government, and also to consider the overall work of select committees. You do also have other examples where it may not necessarily be, let's say, like in the UK, where you have 3 specific sittings of this liaison committee consisting of select committee chairs. But you do also have examples in other countries like Japan, for instance. You have where, but it's not a specific committee, but also other parliaments such as Sweden, Norway, Finland, do also have, sort of processes where it's not necessarily routine as in 3 times a year, but they sit on an ad hoc basis where you have committee chairs from all the different portfolio committees. And so I think in the South African case, what it will be interesting, of course, going forward is to see to what extent this might lead to greater coordination amongst the different portfolio committees, where you may have certain sittings per annum, whether it's 2, whether it's 3, depending on the feasibility and, of course, what may be adopted in the National Assembly. But what may be interesting to see is whether this may lead to a process where you have greater coordination amongst the various portfolio committees. Because, of course, when a specific subcommittee is created to play an oversight role over the presidency, this would need to combine the work of all the different portfolio committees. And depending on the issue areas, would then make an input. So for instance, if it was on defense, certainly other portfolio committees would also contribute. If it's on foreign affairs, it would be similar. But even on domestic issues, which have an impact on international relations, there would certainly be a strong role for the portfolio committee on international relations. And I think in the South African case, where this discussion certainly fits is definitely around, Parliament playing a more active role in the foreign policy space. And this becomes especially important, I think, given the dynamics of the domestic political situation in South Africa, where you have growing competition, growing contestation. And so over time, what you see is a growing consensus amongst the different political parties, that there should be a stronger role for Parliament in playing that oversight role on the work of the presidency in foreign policy, but also in other areas, especially when you take into account that, of course, the presidency would also appoint special envoys. So it would be important for Parliament to understand the progress that special envoys are making on the tasks that they have been assigned by the presidency, whether it's in conflict situations in Sudan, whether it's on Western Sahara, whether it's in terms of repairing South Africa's relationship with the United States, and various other avenues where special envoys and special advisors are given tasks. And I think, sort of some of these recommendations that come from the Rules Committee, of course, they will be debated by the different political parties. But generally, what you see is growing convergence around the importance of playing that oversight role over the presidency, and saying that the current platforms may not necessarily be sufficient, and it might be in all the political parties' interests when you are moving into coalition systems, where hypothetically in future any type of configurations could essentially form a government. And therefore, how do you continue to exercise oversight, not just over the line functions, ministries, but also over the presidency? So let me stop there and then ask if Sanusha can also then come in.
Thank you very much, Philani. Honorable Chair, honorable members, thank you very much for the opportunity. I don't have much to add in terms of what Philani has said, but I think what is also important is the kind of alignment that this oversight model will have with regard to the presidential engagement, not just in the context of foreign policy, but I think more in the context of how foreign policy is being implemented, is also how does this have some kind of articulation with provincial governments. The last point to make on what was said was really the role of provinces as well, and also the role of legislature at the provincial level, because foreign policy is not just happening at the level of the presidency or at the national level. It's also being conducted in terms of the kind of engagements that provinces and cities are having in the context of international relations, and the kind of articulation of those policies in terms of the activities, the engagements, and also the kind of visits that are being done, both in terms of whether it's about investment, trade, and other kinds of commercial activities, but also in terms of the kind of engagement with regard to people to people, etc. So we have different fora that defines the architecture of South Africa, of not just South Africa, but about foreign policy. But it also requires, given where we are in South Africa with regard to the kind of domestic political conditions, that this kind of engagement also needs to be thought about in terms of the presidency on the one hand, but also in terms of where this happens at the subnational level within the domestic architecture of the country. And I think that's something that we need to think about in terms of the filter, the way this oversight over the presidency will be important in terms of how it filters down into into the provincial space, but also in terms of the local architecture of how foreign policy is conducted. So there is this kind of very big, broad macro approach to what Palani has articulated in terms of the oversight body, the rules, the initiatives that are basically being managed through the presidency, and how that is articulated through an oversight model within the national parliament. But it also then requires some kind of ventilation of this at the provincial level as well, because there will be implications, particularly around the kind of projects, the kind of implementation, the kind of engagements that happen, and how that then also filters into that space, and whether we can see that kind of manifestation take place. So that's the one thing that I think is critical in terms of how much does the national architecture, environment, and infrastructure context impact on the provincial architecture as well, in terms of not just the presidency, but in terms of how foreign policy is conducted, the implications that this has. The second point I want to perhaps circle to, Chair, is the question around to what extent do we actually think about South African foreign policy and also the role of the presidency, but also the role, and I think I'm veering into a little bit of a discussion around the kind of oversight approach that happens in the context of the actors that Palani had mentioned in terms of the review, the South African Foreign Policy Review publication, and the kind of issues that come out of that, and who are the actors that are involved in foreign policy, not just in foreign policy making and decision making, but also in conducting foreign policy in terms of engagements. We talk about trade, we talk about investment, we talk about commercial diplomacy, but also I think in the scholarship environment as well, how much of that engagement is also part of the foreign policy oversight. And I think part of this is looking at our role in multilateral fora, and looking at our role in terms of how do we actually engage with counterparts, whether in government, outside of government, non-state actors, etc., in the foreign policy space. And so there are a number of different academic fora that we have in South Africa that definitely provides a platform for how South Africa should be conducting foreign policy. But they do play a role in the context of the engagements, the policy articulation, the outcomes, the discussions, the studies, and so forth. And that does have an important impact on how I think the foreign policy oversight should be constructed, should be ventilated, and so forth. And these are people that are also part of the advisors that are linked in to the presidency as well. And they do take they do provide a very important kind of role in terms of the advice, the engagements, etc., from the kind of track 2 to the track 1. So in other words, from the think tank community, the scholarship community, the actors in not just in the think tank community, but also as advisors on trade and investment, and of course institutions that link up to those kinds of engagements and activities that do play a role as advisors to the presidency, or may have an important impact on how this shapes the presidency's initiatives. And I think that is a set of actors that also need to be included in the circle of oversight, because their role is about advising, and that advice does play a critical dimension in how these initiatives that become part and parcel of the presidency's foreign policy engagements or are anchored in the presidency actually have an impact on our foreign policy strategic orientation as well as our engagements going forward. And that kind of oversight, I think, is important to think about whether we have a delegation that goes to the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. It's formalized, a delegation that's part of the think tank community under the BRICS Academic Forum, a delegation that is part of the IPSA Forum, or any other multilateral forum that has this kind of engagement with, where the advisors, etc., also having a critical role to play as part of the track 2 diplomacy. And I think, as well as with the business as well. But I think this is critical to have that oversight as well, to understand what is being the kind of articulation of the policy spectrum, the policy engagement, and how are they articulating that in the context of whether they're playing a role as advisors to the presidency in the various initiatives that have been initiated in the presidency under foreign policy, but also in the context of the other line ministries, if I can make that point. And I hope I'm being clear enough, because these are important delegations that are engaging with counterparts in other countries around how policy engagement, issues of mutual interest, how does this inform our strategic engagements around things like global governance reform, around the multilateral engagement, around issues in Africa, around the questions around the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. These are critical pulse points, and if not pivots, in the foreign policy oversight mechanism. And it's important to understand how that oversight also plays a role to the adoption of initiatives in the presidency, but also to the implementation of initiatives in the presidency that's not only happening in the line ministries, but is happening in the presidency, as was articulated by Philani. So I think those 2 points are very important for me to find the synergies around what this recommendation on oversight model will look like, how it will inform the kind of texture, but also the kind of content of the oversight model by Parliament in terms of the National Assembly's Rules Committee making the recommendation for a subcommittee to develop an oversight model and approach with respect to the presidency. But I think it also helps to find a much more cohesive, coherent approach in terms of bringing the other actors in the foreign policy space that may not necessarily always be in the think tank community, but they may be coming to play a role in foreign policy through their engagement with the presidency, but also through their engagement with forums and business councils, etc., that may be articulating their oversight to different parliamentary committees, but it needs to actually be part of this broader ecosystem around the international relations engagement. I'll stop there, Chair, and I think we'll take more questions, and I think we can ventilate more of this discussion through the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Dr. Mthembu and Sanusha for the presentation on understanding context and content around how we deal with IR around the presidency, what Parliament is trying to do, how we relate with provinces, and so on. We can now engage with the presentation. Honorable members. Okay. I'm going to request that members who want to speak must raise their hand so that we note the hands, and after those hands we close, after the responses from the presenters. So that members don't, during the engagement, start raising their hands. So I will request that we all raise our hands, those who want to speak. We take those hands in that sequence. Thereafter, we give an opportunity to the presenters to respond. And then we close so that we prepare ourselves to go to the Cape Town International Convention Center. In sequence, as raised today, the hands are as follows. Honorable Wesley Douglas, Honorable Nobile Nhlongo, Honorable Ryan Smith, and Honorable Andisiwe Kumbaca. The hands have been raised in that order, honorable members, and I want to repeat. The consequence is that those will be the only 4 hands who are going to take. And if there's any other member who still wants to speak, please raise your hand now. So we will have only those 4 members who will be engaging with the presentations, honorable members. We will start with Honorable Wesley Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to the presenters for the presentation. This is a very important part of our oversight responsibilities as members of Parliament in the International Relations Committee. One of the big challenges that we have is that the President, in his role as head of the executive, doesn't just represent the ruling GNU government. He represents all of us as South Africans. And as such, he has the accountability to all South Africans, for those that voted for him and those who didn't vote for him. And therefore, accountability to this House is of paramount importance in order to make sure that when he goes out there, that the messaging that he gives there doesn't put us in a worse situation and doesn't reflect just the GNU's position, but it reflects what's in the best interest of all South Africans. When you look at the foreign policy, it must be people-centered, Mr. Chair, and not be focused on business and on white monopoly capital. We saw by the Oval Office visit how he paraded out Johan Rupert and a whole lot of other white monopoly capital representatives who have illegally and consistently undermined this country and have called us to be under some kind of scrutiny for a white genocide that's never happened. And this narrative was never corrected by the president and was never corrected by these people. It was embellished by these people. And Mr. Chair, they are the traitors, those people that went with the president. And the president needs to be answering to this House for why they have had so little powerful, impactful messaging on going against this narrative of white genocide. It's almost as if they've allowed it to happen and allowed the world to think this of us. The president's current strategies, the economic diplomacy has enriched mining conglomerates and arms dealers, not the informal traders, not youth entrepreneurs, not township businesses. They've enriched people like Elon Musk by opening doors that makes them not be able to comply with our own laws and legislations on black economic empowerment. Also, I want to raise the issue of special envoys. The special envoys are hardly ever scrutinized. We still don't have full reports on recent envoy missions to the Middle East, Russia, and Eastern DRC. We must demand a full public disclosure of the costs, the objectives, and outcomes of all the special envoy deployments. The deployment of SANDF troops to Mozambique, to DRC, and the Red Sea Operation Mosi, we have completely lacked transparency in these things and how those thoughts and those things came across. We don't have full cost transparency, we don't have long-term exit strategy, and we don't have parliamentary debate and a popular mandate around these things. We must have a War Powers Act to prevent unilateral foreign deployments, real-time oversight mechanisms, and budgetary transparency on all SAND foreign missions. So the president can't just declare war and engage our troops without coming to this House and giving an account. We must have monthly foreign policy oversight reports to this committee. We can't just be blind and just get the occasional feedback. We need compulsory briefings before and after presidential state visits or international negotiations. And we need to appoint a parliamentary policy ombuds to audit promises versus delivery. Because, we see in the foreign policy that there's a lot of promises, but very little delivery, Mr. Chair. The president failed dismally in countering this dangerous white genocide rhetoric. And we need to ask him, why is he allowing that narrative to go ahead so that other foreign powers can intervene in our freedom? No, Mr. Chair. We're not going to allow other people to interfere and for some big brother to be called to come and keep our people to account for land reform. Land reform and compensation, land expropriation without compensation is an imperative for our country, and we need it, and we are not going to allow America or anybody else to tell us any different, Mr. Chair. The president's repeated borrowing from the International Monetary Fund fund, including the most recent 94 billion rand facility, is a betrayal of our sovereignty and a direct contradiction to the Pan-African ideals laid out in the AU's Agenda 2063. Why are we increasing our debt dependency when this very committee and our people have rejected neoliberal austerity? This deepens our debt to GDP ratio, already approaching 76%, and redirects budget priorities away from housing, jobs, and education towards debt servicing, which already consumes 385 billion per annum. Mr. Chair, this is selling our children's futures out, and we are not for that. Billions have flowed from the African Renaissance Fund, but where are the audited reports? What developmental returns have these projects yielded? Why are civil society and parliament left in the dark continuously, Mr. Chair? The presidency has to have proper oversight from this house, and he has to come give an account to the people of South Africa, because we represent the voters, we represent the poor, we represent the marginalized, we represent the mother that's not being able to feed their children today, that is crying out to God, Lord, please provide some needs for me. Those are the people we represent. How is people going to work with this increase in fuel levies, etc.? So, Mr. Chair, a joint parliamentary committee on foreign missions and agreements needs to be established to scrutinize every major agreement before it is signed, so that we can understand what is being signed. We don't know what happened there in America at the Oval Office. How much of our children's future and of our natural resources and our rare earth minerals was signed away by the president that will never be able to benefit our people and be exported raw? No, Mr. Chair, we're no longer going to have this kind of nonsense happening in South Africa, where our jobs are exported as raw materials. We need to beneficiate those minerals, and we need to create jobs here, not jobs for Americans or jobs for Europeans or jobs for other people. Mr. Chair, this is a sellout, and this president is selling our nation out to foreign powers. Instead of using that rare earth minerals and the access to our, giving Elon Musk and Starlink the ability to come into this country without BEE is a national security threat. And the president needs to give an account for that, because we don't want that nonsense here in South Africa. Mr. Chair, we need to make sure that there's a constitutional amendment or review of Section 231 to limit executive power to enter binding treaties without direct parliamentary consent. Because how can they agree to binding treaties and they don't come and speak to the people who was voted in? Even if we're in opposition, we must have oversight, especially because we're in opposition. We must have an oversight of those treaties. How many bilateral agreements have been signed that we know nothing of? How much of our goods and our services has been just sold off without our people benefiting on the ground? Why is it only white monopoly capital companies that get into the Chinese market, get into the European markets, get into the American markets? Why are we not taking the people from the townships, the youth from the townships? Why aren't we giving them funding? Why aren't we giving them support to enter into global markets? No, it's because we are only here for business. That's what this president is about. He's a businessman looking out for the interest of business, keeping status quo, making the rich richer and the poor poorer. And we're not for that, Mr. Chair. We want to make sure, Mr. Chair, that in future, when we do these kind of things, that we must make sure that the president is held to an account and to a standard that can basically be said, no, you can't just go and do anything. We want to see those bilateral agreements. We want to see it before it gets signed, not in like a year's time when we get the reports in our committee and then we see, oh, this is what was signed. And we don't even get that. We don't even get the details. We get an overview, we get a PowerPoint, and then we're supposed to work on that. But then in the society, what we see is the white monopoly capital gets all the contracts, while our black businesses get nothing. So, Mr. Chair, as far as we're concerned, this is a real failure. And then in terms of foreign policy, where is the African, Aboriginal, and indigenous people in the president's speeches? Where is our rights as the regional landowners? We are anti-imperialist, Mr. Chair. We don't want to be recolonized and under a new modern colonialism, which is a corporate colonialism. We need to stop that, Mr. Chair. People, we need to stand and we need to fight for African black businesses to grow bigger than Elon Musk's company, than Johan Rupert's companies, than the people who have dominated this on stolen land. They stole our land, they stole our resources, they need to give it back. And the president needs to be held account for taking those people to the Oval Office, Mr. Chair, because those people are the traitors of the black South African. Those people are the traitors who have stolen our land, stolen our resources, and given nothing back. So he needs to come and give an account, and we need mechanisms to be put in place that will hold him and this executive into account. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Douglas. Honorable Ngobile Mhlongo.
Ngiyabonga Sihlalo. Good morning to yourselves. Good morning to other honorable members, the team from IGD and our staff members, and staff members as well from DERCO. Chair, mine I will start it like this. Like, how do we, as this committee, Chair, ensure that we hold the different ministers and the presidents on the implementation of our foreign policy? I'm agreeing with Honorable Douglas. I think we have said this many times. At the risk of sounding like a scratch record, Chair, we are going to repeat it. We are going to have joint committees with especially the Committee of Trade, Industry and Competition on how to hold the minister, including the president, to account on the international trade agreements that they sign with the different countries, so that we're able to check if these deals or agreements that they are making, are they really in line with our national interest as South Africa? Are they going to benefit South Africa in the long run or in the immediate? So we can't have ministers permanently signing trade agreements and there is no one to hold them accountable to say, let's get the details of this trade agreement that was signed. Let's see the terms and conditions. Let's scrutinize everything that is contained in this deal and ensure that it is of benefit, first and foremost, to South Africans. It benefits us as a country before it can benefit anybody else. And check if these deals we're making are in line with our national interest priorities, are in line with our foreign policies. But also, Chair, I like how it was mentioned in the presentation that, all spheres of government are implementing foreign policy in one way or another. Now, Chair, myself, I speak because I was a councillor for almost 9-10 years in the seat of Tshwane. Now, Chair, I know for a fact in the municipalities, in the metros, there is no committee that deals with international relations to hold the executive mayor or the MMCs on implementation of or to hold them to account on the investment deals that they sign, either with embassies or with multinational companies. I'll give you an example, Chair. You've got a city like the city of Tshwane signing investment deals with a company like Ford, with BMW, with Nissan, with Coca-Cola, with the different multinational companies that are found in the city of Tshwane, right? They've got these investment deals that they sign, but there is no established committees in terms of the rules that say that this is how we're going to hold the executive to account on these international investment deals that they're signing with these multi-companies on behalf of the city. Now, how do we then ensure that we then play an oversight in areas like that, whether it's played by the municipalities or it's played by the province or even by parliament? Because once a deal is signed between a city and a multinational company or with an embassy or with a different state, then it means it's in the interest of South Africa. It involves all of us as citizens of the country. We must then be able to hold these deals and scrutinize these investments that have been signed on our behalf, Chair. So I think we must look at how to explore such avenues, Chair, so that we then better hold all our stakeholders or all the spheres of government accountable. I'll give you an example, Chair. You've got like here in the Western Cape. The Western Cape is run by your GNU partners, the Democratic Alliance, Chair. Now, you do not want a situation where the DA goes and signs multinational deals with Israel, for an example, because we know that the position of South Africa on Israel, we in the 6th Parliament, there was a motion that was passed and was agreed to by majority of the members of the House that South Africa should cut all diplomatic ties with Israel. So we must then be able to better monitor such instances and situations. I will remember, Chair, city of Johannesburg, at a time when Honorable Makubela was the Speaker of the city of Johannesburg. She held a position that was contradicting and used the platform given to her as the Speaker of a metro to canvass for an individual position that South Africa should not really work, should not really cut diplomatic ties with Israel, because at the time she believed that, or she sided with the Israel government over the people of Palestine. So how then do we ensure that when we've got different kinds of views like that, that the position of the state, the position of parliament is protected from opportunistic views that individuals hold? Because once we believe that the parliament of South Africa represent all South Africans, is the constitution, the constituent of parliament is as a result of democratic processes. Therefore, once the people have the voters and the people of South Africa have pronounced themselves, then they've got absolute trust in the processes of parliament. And we can have a situation where we've got somewhere a mayor of a municipality, a speaker, a chief whip, or an MMC pronouncing something completely different from what is the position of the state. However, Chair, we are also still interested in knowing, to this day, the city of Johannesburg was supposed to have passed to rename Sentin Drive to Leila Khalid Street. To this day, that street has not been renamed. Surprisingly, interference came from our committee, from DERCO, and through the presidency, that they must engage the city of Johannesburg and perhaps interfere. For me, it is interfering in what the city was doing. They had passed a motion in council through using the bylaws of the city, of which is something that is very familiar. So what is the role then of DERCO going to city of Johannesburg and say you cannot rename a street Sentin Drive to be Leila Khalid Street because it's going to sour the relationships we have with the USA? That was a very problematic move, Chair. And I really think, as this committee, Chair, we ought to write a letter to the minister and come and have DERCO come account on those actions that they've done and explain to all of us if this is something they are familiar with doing, if they've done it before in any other municipality in the country, whereby when they rename streets in their municipality, then DERCO gets in and interfere. What was the role of DERCO? What was the intervention they seek to do in the city of Johannesburg? And what are the results? And why is it that to this day, Sentin Drive has not been renamed? Because that, for me, speaks directly to our foreign policies. We need accountability. Once DERCO enters the space anywhere else, it means they've invited us as a committee, Chair, and they must come here to account to us. I hope, Chair, my proposal will be supported, and we write really a letter to the minister to come here and explain what happened there. Another issue I wanted to bring, Chair, is that our interest as the economic freedom fighters is that what are the deals that were signed by South Africa, either through the president or the ministers he took with him to the US on his recent work visit to the US, with that delegation that consisted mainly white Afrikaner males who represent the ill-gotten wealth that they possess over, at the exclusion of the majority of our people. What are the deals that were signed on that day, Chair? We ought to, I saw Minister Lamula, I think it's CNN, being interviewed. They're saying that he's happy about the deals that they were able to sign. Really, Chair, it intrigued something in me, that what are those deals that they have signed on our behalf and nobody has the audacity to come and present those deals to us. So we must also, Chair, write a letter to the minister and seek his indulgence to come and brief us as the portfolio committee on what are the deals that were signed on that day, and we scrutinize those deals, Chair. Now, Chair, another proposal is that once a term, we must be able to have a joint committee with Home Affairs. I'm going to explain why we must have a deal with a joint committee with Home Affairs. We know that, I'll use one example. We know that we had 6 parliament resolve on cutting diplomatic ties with Israel. And we know that a country like Israel, residents or Israel citizens, they do not need a visa to come and enter South Africa. That is very problematic, Chair. We have seen over the past weekend, we had Israeli soldiers coming to participate at the 2025 Comrades Marathon in KwaZulu-Natal, Chair. That for me is a spit on the face of all South Africans and a spit on the face of our government. How dare we allow Israeli soldiers to come and participate in the Comrades Marathon when we know full well that the position of South Africa says that we cut all diplomatic relations with Israel. But how then do we implement that resolution if we have Home Affairs acting in silos, but also Home Affairs says that Israel citizens, they do not need a visa to come to South Africa. These are things that we need to revisit as South Africa. Perhaps have a joint committee with Home Affairs as well as with tourism, because they will. I know tourism sector will say, no, hey, now you want to introduce visa requirements for citizens of different countries from entering is going to affect the tourism sector. But that is neither here nor there. The important thing is that we've got a resolution that was implemented by Parliament. To this day, the President has not accounted or told Parliament how they are going to implement this resolution of cutting the diplomatic ties with Israel. We have seen it that it has not happened. We are speaking in folk tongues. It's not true. What Parliament passes, the President is not able to implement, because we have seen it for ourselves. As the EFF went there to the Comrades Marathon, we confronted those Israeli soldiers. We told them that you leave our country. Why are we running here when you people have been killing the children and the citizens and women and the young people and ordinary citizens in Palestine? So we must be able, Chair, to then say, okay, this is a resolution that was passed by Parliament. Who is the implementing agent? Is going to be Home Affairs, because Home Affairs grants visas. And then we then change the regulations of Home Affairs and say any Israeli citizen who applies to get visa, we must then introduce visa requirements to enter South Africa if you are from Israel, so that we are then able to not grant any citizen of Israel a visa to enter our country because we do not want to have any relationships with that a country of Israel, because we know that they are in apartheid era, they are apartheid state, they are very genocidal. But also, Chair, how then do we play oversight on the deployment of the defense force? I think I heard they were speaking about peace and security. There was that element that was raised, that how to ensure we play oversight role on the on ensuring that we keep peace and stability, peace, security, and stability of our country, because we know that there's deployment of defense force to different parts of Africa. But at the end of the day, we have seen on numerous occasions, we can go back to the time of Central African Republic. It was the person who was then held accountable at that time was the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans. Even now, with the deployment of our force to DRC, who then gets to be called to committees to come and account, is only the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans. What happens to the President? Because the President is the final arbiter, is the final person who puts a pen and approves any deployment of our defense force. Then it means the President must also be invited to come and be held accountable on those actions that they were doing along with the Minister of deploying our defense force and not giving them enough resources to be able to be fit for purpose and be able to play proper oversight. So those are the things, Chair, I wanted to just bring to your attention. But also, Chair, to say that, today at 2:00, like we have rightly said, is the budget vote. If we have not received adequate answers and all people who wanted to meaningfully contribute have not done so, I'm proposing, like the last time we had a budget vote 2.0, that we extend this meeting to roll over to next week, Wednesday. We finish the segment of this meeting before we start with a business of next week's committee meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ngobile Mhlongo. Honorable Rian Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair, and please excuse my voice. I think I might be coming down with a cold. But I just
want you sound like very white. It's a nice voice.
All right. Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank the Dr. Mthembu and Sanusha for a very insightful presentation, which I think gives us a lot of context around the need for an evolution, I think, in the way that South Africa addresses its foreign policy concerns. And I think a broader discussion that we need to be having, certainly in this committee, is the way in which this department interfaces with the presidency by means of the legislative framework provided for it. And I say that because we know that in any constitutional democracy, certainly in South Africa's dispensation, DIRCO and the presidency really function hand in hand. The Minister of Foreign Affairs traditionally is very, very close to the president and the presidency. We know that the Minister of Foreign Affairs is required to give far more frequent briefings to the president compared to other ministers, for example. And that's done for very good reason. South Africa's engagement with international actors, and certainly in an interstatal manner, is crucial on a number of concerns. If you look more broadly at the cluster, it has concerns relating to immigration, relating to economic growth and foreign direct investment, etc. But I think the core issue that we need to address here is the fact that South Africa has not evolved from enacting foreign policy, and certainly foreign policy decisions from within the presidency under a single party political majority, to one of a multi-party coalition. And that certainly is what South Africa's future will be. We're going through the growing pains, I think, of democracy with the current coalition. We know that no party is predicted to ever hold an outright majority nationally. And so we need to start laying the groundwork now as to how we take decisions around the appointments of ambassadors, for example, or the signing of international treaties, or the broader direction of South Africa as it enters the international space. And I think more broadly around what our national interest is and how that informs our foreign policy. And we touched on this briefly, I think, with Dr. Mthembu and Sanusha about 2 weeks ago when we had a very informative committee meeting at that stage. And I think therein is really where we can see just how toothless this committee itself has become. We have very little oversight over crucial decisions taken that affect millions of South Africans. And I think just leaving the executive branch, there needs to be a discussion, certainly at an executive level, as to how cabinet informs foreign policy decisions. But certainly at the legislative branch, we need to also be able to conduct the necessary and requisite scrutiny over the department. And I say that on both the foreign policy level, we have a lot of discussions around ideology and how ideology informs foreign policy, which are crucial. But we get very little oversight over the day-to-day functioning of the department itself. This parliament, the 7th parliament, has now been established for, I think, close to a year. I think it's safe to say that Minister Lamola has appeared maybe twice or 3 times if we've been lucky, and in very short bursts where there's very little engagement or ability to interrogate the minister or his DG or deputy DG for that matter on the inner workings of the department. And someone mentioned the other day that the ministers are very busy. It's a G20 period. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not an excuse. We are busy at any given moment on any number of international matters within this department. That's the department's job. But our democracy and our oversight institutions are established for good reason, so that we can have regular engagements with the minister, so that we can have regular, robust oversight discussions over the department itself. And when we conducted oversight over the OR Tambo building a few weeks ago, it was interesting to hear about and to see departments within DIRCO that we've never heard of before. And Chair, I would just like to appeal to you, if you're still on the platform, yes, still on the platform, to really have a more lasered focus on oversight within the department. We cannot just have the entire set of DIRCO before us with an hour to engage with the department. We need to have 2 to 3 hours with public diplomacy. We need to have 2 to 3 hours with consular services, where we can conduct oversight over the implementation of services to citizens living abroad. I think that the nature of this committee is far too watered down and far too focused on the pandering to particular constituencies than actually focusing on the national interest. And I think we need to have a broader discussion and certainly weaponize this committee to a far greater extent so that it actually is effective within the legislative framework. And, you know, given that Parliament is the engine room of our democracy, if we look at the fact that the legislative framework around the president's role in conjunction with the Minister of Foreign Affairs to take decisions on matters pertaining to international relations, well, yes, the president is vested with a large amount of power, the only power really when it comes to appointing ambassadors and so forth. But we have yet to grapple with the fact that the president is no longer elected by a single political party. And so therein, it creates another question as to how are these decisions going to be taken? What sort of legislative framework are we going to provide in a coalition framework for foreign policy directives to be taken? And the framework is very scant. I mean, Section 11.9 of the Statement of Intent for the Government of National Unity has a single sentence on foreign policy. And it says foreign policy based on human rights, constitutionalism, the national interest, solidarity, peaceful resolution of conflicts to achieve the African Agenda 2063, South-South, North-South, and African cooperation, multilateralism, and a just, peaceful, and equitable world. I mean, any single one of those words you could pull apart over a number of days or months, to be quite honest. We have yet to have a discussion around what South Africa's national interest is. When we talk about solidarity, who are we showing solidarity to, for what reasons, and who gets to decide, and why do they decide that? Peaceful resolution of conflicts. Why is there a discrepancy between conflicts in certain parts of the world in relation to others? The achievements of the African Agenda 2063. Well, we're not even talking about South Africa's role within the AU outside of that. The fact that we pay membership fees and other African states don't. We're not looking at we've stated multilateralism while completely ignoring the increasingly bilateral nature of international relations and foreign trade, certainly within the Trump era and in the wake of many other elections that have taken place across the world. And these are discussions that we really should be having in this committee and are really crucial, I think, to informing how government conducts its foreign policy going forward. And so, Chair, I just wanted to make that point, that this committee really, we often skirt around the issues that we should be discussing, or we talk about them in broad strokes without actually getting to the meat of South Africa's foreign policy and the decisions taken therein. We don't get to scrutinize over the appointment of special advisors, for example, to key trading partners such as Washington in the United States of America. We don't get to liaise with other departments within the cluster around immigration concerns, around defense, and even outside of the cluster around foreign direct investment and domestic policies that either encourage or deter it. And I think that just it really sets, or it cements the point over the importance of this department and the fact that we do not get to conduct the requisite oversight over it. And the fact that it's treated much as a tick box exercise. We sit here and debate ideology. We've got certain members who repeat the same thing, but we don't actually ever get to engage at a level that is functional and that has material benefit for not only the country, but the face of our government as we interface with other countries and other nations on the international stage. So I just wanted to make that point, Chair. And if I may, just really call on you as the chairperson to specify the agenda for this committee. Can we please invite the relevant departments from DIRCO with adequate time so that we can conduct oversight? Can we please agree that at least once a month we meet in person or travel to Pretoria so that we can interrogate the relevant departments or conduct our business as required? We have had no oversight over the G20. I think we've had Labour 20 came and gave us a very brief presentation by a COSATU representative. And we had some discussions around Women 20 and Youth 20. We have no idea what the agenda items are on crucial working groups of the G20, such as Business 20, such as Labour 20, Oceans 20. We have Township 20. There's no engagement on that. And it really shows that much of what the department does is kept away from this committee. And it really is an undermining way of centralizing power in terms of foreign policy within DIRCO and the presidency, without Parliament having oversight over it and without coalition partners themselves having oversight over it. And I think this is really something that we need to grapple with going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Ryan Smith. Honorable Andisiwe Kumbalka.
No, thank you, Chair, and good morning to yourself and the honorable members present, and also the team, and our support team too. Chairperson, mine is to firstly welcome the presentation, and I also welcome the opportunity to reflect on this very critical topic, I believe, especially when it comes to our oversight work as a committee. You know, in our constitutional democracy, you know, the president is head of state and head of government, you know, as per section 84 of the constitution. So you know, they are solely responsible for international relations, you know, and it includes many things, you know, as we all know, like appointment of ambassadors and signing very critical international agendas. So, of course, they are subject to us as Parliament, but I think we really need to also just remember the crucial role the presidency plays, and not only the department itself. So I think, as I was saying even last time, in our last session, that as a portfolio committee, we need to play a more proactive role in scrutinizing, you know, the executive decisions in these foreign matters. And the most important one is tracking the implementation of these, you know, agreements and foreign policy commitments, especially in terms of when it comes to economic diplomacy and the developmental part of it. Like we've been saying, I think the regular briefings from DIRCO are very important, also in assisting us, but I also think with the presidency, it's very important that we also hold these regular briefings with them when it comes to these matters. I think we also need to institutionalize, you know, some sort of annual foreign policy review sessions, you know, or introduce it rather. So I think the state of our foreign policy, or not foreign policy, but even agreements, needs to be reported to our committee. And the report should, you know, highlight or present strategic agreements which are aligned with our foreign policy objectives. So I think a better coordination between ourselves and the department and also the presidency is very important. I also think I believe we also need to be consulted early in terms of other like agreement negotiation processes, you know, so that we are also able to enhance those decisions. And as members of the IR committee, we must be active participants in, you know, parliamentary diplomacy, and of course, continue engaging with our counterparts in other countries, so that even our work as parliaments is aligned, and there's synergy between ourselves and also what the executive does. So yeah, I think we must just remain committed to those matters, and just ensure that the synergy between ourselves and the presidency and DIRCO, and also our counterparts in the various states where these agreements are agreed upon. So that's it from my side, Chair. I think we just have to play a proactive role and ensure that we are committed to a progressive foreign policy that reflects our values. Thank you.
Thanks, Honorable Andiswe Kumbatha. Honorable Douglas, if you can lower your hand, please. Over to you, Dr. Philani and Sanu.
Thank you, Chair. I think, sort of some important inputs. I think it's certainly clear that indeed the president and the role of the president is certainly not, is certainly not simply to, let's say, represent, let's say, the governing coalition, but it is about the national interest. And I think sort of the current political landscape that we find ourselves in, and the role of this particular portfolio committee then becomes very important in inculcating a discussion amongst the different political parties, but also broader society, in forging a better idea and creating better clarity of what constitutes the national interest, irrespective of which sort of configuration of political parties forms a government. So this is certainly, I think, quite important and definitely well noted. But I think also the work and the inputs that come in show that the work of the portfolio committee, so it's not just, sort of about, I mean, we know that one of the biggest challenges in South Africa is reconciling the policy frameworks with the implementation of those policies. And so enhanced role in terms of accountability, in terms of oversight, that actually also assists government to ensure that it has a better monitoring and evaluation mechanism, so that it is able to regularly go back to the promises and that it has actually made. So ensuring better accountability also ensures better implementation going forward. It's certainly true that there is this challenge around how do you engage with your special envoys, but beyond just engaging with the special envoys themselves, is about engaging on the content and the mandate that they have been provided. Many of the special envoys will have some kind of a performance agreement with the presidency. There will be some form of terms of reference that are signed. And then, of course, this becomes important, that Parliament has an understanding of the implementation, but also gets a better sense of the associated costs related to their mission. And of course, costs is one element of the picture, but impact is also the other element. So, the role of Parliament is partly to say, yes, there are these costs related to the assignments of special envoys, but are we able to match the costs associated with the impact that they are having in their respective missions? And so this is also important in terms of assisting the state to implement its mandate. I think it's very important, sort of some of the areas pointed out around ensuring that in our trade agreements, that we have not only a sort of a big picture, but that we also have a disaggregated picture of who benefits from the trade agreements, from market access into other parts of the world. And there, especially the role of small and medium-sized enterprises in ensuring, greater access to certain markets, and to ensure that it's not only large corporations that benefit from trade agreements, but that sort of the benefits of greater trade are in line with the country's objectives of eradicating poverty, addressing unemployment, and also inequality. So this is really quite important, and I think in having more detailed engagements with the presidency, but also with the ministry and others who enact and enforce our foreign policy, assists us to get a better sense of whether the big picture in terms of trade also translates to jobs, addressing unemployment and poverty. It's definitely important to have those joint committee sittings. It helps in terms of the coordination, because indeed, I mean, as Sanusha also mentioned, that there is almost every department, but also provinces and cities are involved in foreign policy. And so it's not just about the national dimension. It's not just about national government, but it's about ensuring alignment at a national, provincial, and going all the way down to ensure that indeed, that no part of government is sort of, taking steps that are contrary to what constitutes the national interest and the consensus of the day. It's definitely important, as some have mentioned, that the approach to oversight continues to evolve. And certainly by engaging other portfolio committees in other countries, that will remain important to ensure alignment and continued best practices. But it also helps, sort of, it's another way of ensuring oversight. So to give an example, if, let's say following the Oval Office meeting with the South African delegation, if there are engagements between the portfolio committee and counterparts in the United States, it also assists the committee to get further information on how the American side has viewed the recent visit to the White House, because they will also have their own processes of grilling the executive. And by having an exchange, it also ensures that, the portfolio committee is not only dependent on information only coming, let's say, from the Department of International Relations or from the presidency, but that it also comes from similar oversight committees in the US, in Europe, in other African countries where South African foreign policy extends. So I think this is definitely important in terms of evolving the approach, having sort of joint sittings, and also getting more regular updates, not just about the macro picture, but also about the more granular details within the department. It is a very big department, as one of the members have mentioned. It's a very big department, and there are many moving parts, and so that regular engagement definitely will assist the work of the committee going forward. But my last point is that I think this committee really, it is a unique committee, and in being a unique committee, it comes with challenges, but also it comes with opportunities. The real opportunity is really on the role that this committee can play in terms of really fostering a robust engagement around what constitutes the national interest, so that what you have evolving is indeed a not only a minimal consensus amongst political parties of what constitutes the national interest, but also you have broader consensus within broader society around what constitutes a national interest. And I think this particular portfolio committee plays a key role in being a catalyst for those types of engagements across party lines and with broader society. And that may lead to sort of finding each other on what constitutes national interest. There may be deviations amongst political parties on how you execute that, on the style of and the approach, but it becomes important that there are minimal agreements of what does constitute the national interest. So let me stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Doctor, are you done?
Yes, Chair, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Honorable Powell, I did ask members to raise their hands. We are getting a feedback now. You made a choice not to raise your hand. I asked members 3 times to raise their hands, those who wanted to speak. So you didn't raise your hand. Sanusha, over to you.
Chairperson, I'm not raising my hand on a substantive matter. When you are done, I would like to please raise a matter arising. Thank you.
Sanusha, can you proceed?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, honorable members as well. I think that it's been quite an informative response to the presentation, but also the issues that need to go forward, which, as Pelani had rightly pointed out, is quite unique for the committee. For me, Chair, there's just 2 points that I want to make. The one is, I think, the internal dynamic of how the committee wants to structure the oversight in alignment to parliamentary processes, but also in terms of the kind of information, the kind of experience, and the kind of engagements that the committee has had thus far with the executive, with DIRCO, but also I think in the broader context of the oversight role that the committee has played in terms of its mandate. And I think that's something that's very important for the committee to develop what the kind of oversight role that they want to take forward, how they want to ventilate it, how they want to structure it, and more importantly, how it needs to be aligned in terms of the presidency, DIRCO, the executive more broadly, given that foreign policy is not just in the presidency in terms of mandate and implementation or in DIRCO, but rather happens across the board in terms of the cabinet from different ministries. And then, of course, to define that in the context of the ongoing processes in Parliament around oversight and the alignment to that. So I think that's the one strategy or the one kind of intervention I'll make in this regard in terms of the defining of the strategic framework of oversight for the committee going forward, and how that both relates to engagement with stakeholders, not necessarily on the oversight with the executive, but rather with stakeholders that are able to provide the kind of engagement that you will seek with regard to helping to build the capacity, the insights of the committee on their oversight role. And that's the one point. I think the second point to make, and that is this question around having access to documentation and having access to be able to know the nature of the visits that are taking place, that are being conducted in the context of foreign policy, and the bilateral and the multilateral engagements, and what South Africa is, how does the oversight then help to build, strengthen, and deepen South Africa's foreign policy objectives and priorities and engagements. I think it's important to also think about the idea that there is a calendar as an example I want to give. There is a calendar of events that DIRCO provides on its website, or even can get from DIRCO. And to be able to structure that into the work of and the mandate of the committee in terms of how you want to build that oversight, in terms of the information gathering, in terms of the engagements that are going to take place, have taken place, and then a post reflection of that, because that will enable you to enable the committee to be able to structure the framing of how you want to conduct the year of the committee's work on oversight, and to be able to align it to some of the objectives, priorities, etc., around the framing of South African foreign policy, but the engagements in terms of content. And I think the issue raised by Honourable Member Smith around the G20 is an interesting starting point, but it's also an interesting point to look at in terms of the alignment of South Africa's engagements in international fora, but in terms of the presentation that was made by the National Planning Commission a few weeks ago around the impact of South Africa hosting international events and chairing international organizations. That's a very key way in which to understand what kind of impact does these kinds of engagements have on South African foreign policy. And one of the examples in that presentation and in the report that was the full report that was presented, which I was part of the study to do IGD was part of that study that did that assessing of international engagements, was the fact that we looked at different case studies. We looked at China, we looked at I think it was the UAE, Abu Dhabi, and we looked at Rwanda. And we looked at countries to see how did they use their international relations, their engagements in international organizations to then start to deepen, articulate their foreign policy engagements, but also to have this hosting of international events, or even the chairing of international organizations, to actually build up the foreign policy space in terms of bilateral relations, but also in terms of the multilateral. And I think the example of Abu Dhabi hosting and having the International Renewable Energy Agency within the Emirati is a good way in which they're using that foot traffic from the UN to build up their diplomacy. So I think these are some of the dynamics that would definitely be quite important to take forward in terms of looking at DIRCO, but also looking at how do you articulate your foreign policy through these kinds of events, and what will be the implications in terms of how do you want to pivot the foreign policy with regard to your national interest. And that is what I think is very important to find the synergy on. It's a synergy between your national interest, your international kind of engagements, continental engagements, regional engagements, and of course your bilateral. And I think this is where the kind of bringing together that kind of understanding of what the role of foreign policy is, how it's basically engaging around our domestic issues in terms of the National Development Plan and linking to market access, etc., will start to ventilate the kind of oversight that can align to the foreign policy interests, but also in terms of how it is aligning to the National Development Plan and the interest thereof. So I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanusha and Dr. Philani. Before I come to the two hands that I see on the screen here, honorable members, imagine from our meeting, we seem to be suggesting the following in terms of way forward. One is we need quarterly sort of permanently embedded arrangements in the programming, especially from the side of the programming committee, to ensure that there's discussions on international relations matters, particularly on economic diplomacy, and that in the embeddedness of that item in the program of the programming, there should be joint meetings particularly with DTIC, Home Affairs, Tourism, and other related portfolio committees. That's one. Two, that there has to be some kind of a standing item in Parliament on a quarterly basis where there's going to be report backs to Parliament and debates on those reports from the presidency on matters of international relations, and that the same reports which emanate from there must then be taken to the people of South Africa at least twice a year by the portfolio committee. What it means, honorable members, will be that once those reports are tabled in Parliament, before they are adopted, just like the one we are going to deal with here today of the fiscal finance framework, the Speaker will refer those reports to the relevant portfolio committee. We will then be given a chance to go and discuss with the people of South Africa those reports coming from the presidency on international relations matters, and then come back to report to Parliament so that the reports can be adopted and be actionalized. That's number two. Number three, it's on the follow-up. We need to write a letter to the DERCO on a follow-up on many issues, and those issues will include the name change of the Sandton Drive. It will include other engagements that have taken place between DERCO, the presidency, so that by the time the minister comes, because according to our schedule, it was supposed to happen next week on the 18th, the minister should come ready on those issues that have been raised here from the portfolio committee. That includes an update on a decision which was taken by Parliament resolution with regard to matters of Palestine and Israeli conflict. The fourth, coming from the meeting here, is a report on the recent visit by President Ramaphosa to the President of the US, particularly on the agreements that may have been entered into. The link to that, there's a proposal that our own portfolio committee should be liaising for our counterparts in the US on how they themselves have done their own oversight on this matter of the engagement between the US and South Africa. The next one is that we must speak to the programming committee, because we have a difficult one, honorable members. This thing of writing requests and they are turned down is very much frustrating sometimes. That the programming committee has to agree that the matters of IR which are overlapping among the portfolio committees, that should be in the annual program of Parliament. For instance, if we agree that every quarter those meetings have to sit, it has to be something that comes from programming, not as a request from IR requesting the chair of chairs to speak to the programming committee to try and accommodate us in the program, and it is turned down. So the proposal from the meeting here is that those committees which have got IR-related issues will have to have standing meetings on an annual basis, and those standing meetings must be in the program of Parliament. The next proposal is on Pan-African Parliament and the African Union. That because the presidency deals with matters from the African Union, and Parliament through the office of the Speaker deals with matters of the Pan-African Parliament. That proposal which suggests that the Speaker should refer a report on matters of IR to the Portfolio Committee so that the Portfolio Committee can then take it to the masses, then come back to Parliament to report. That report must include matters relating to the AU and matters relating to the Pan-African Parliament, because matters of PAP, which are dealt with by the Speaker's office, and the representatives of political parties which are going to PAP as part of Parliament of South Africa's representatives in PAP, those reports don't go anywhere. Pan-African Parliament sits, and those reports end amongst the delegates who are representing us in the Pan-African Parliament. They don't even get to be tabled and discussed in Parliament. So if they are integrated into this accounting mechanism to the public through a report, then coming back to Parliament to debate and adopt resolutions, that's how we are going to be strengthening accountability. The other matter, honorable members, is a suggestion to you. Members can talk on it. There's this constitutional review committee. And recently there was a publication by the Constitutional Review Committee for members of the public, including members of Parliament, to make suggestions on areas that can be reviewed within the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. It's quite clear that what has been imposed on us as South Africa by the outcomes of the 2024 elections will be a need for us to look at some aspects in the Constitution which relates to how matters of IR are dealt with within the presidency in the context of the GNU. Because as the Portfolio Committee here, we are a consequence of the discussions that took place among various political parties on how to constitute the GNU. So we only became into existence after those agreements were arrived at in the GNU. So as a Portfolio Committee, it will be difficult for us, honorable members, to then come here and want to review matters of the GNU on our own. So I'm suggesting that two things should happen. Matters that relates to discomforts, confusion, and lack of consensus around how matters of IR are dealt with in the context of the GNU now and in the future. Those matters must be referred to the parties in the GNU so that maybe those parties on the GNU must agree to insert a matter that relates to how the GNU is going to be dealing with matters of IR. And I think they will also include how the GNU deals with matters of, it's not related to this committee, matters of appointing ministers. For instance, the power to appoint ministers in the Constitution of the Republic is given to the president. So we are now in a new environment where those things have to be looked at. So I think we will, if members agree, include this proposal that the GNU, based on the experience we have had now, we have almost a year now of the GNU, that we have had 1 year of the GNU experience, and our experience is that we need to look at the following areas based on our experience of the new situation in South Africa over the last 12 months, and that from an IR perspective, these are the suggestions we are making. So the proposals that are made by Honorable Smith will then feature in that part of our recommendations, or in as far as matters of the GNU are concerned, because we don't have the power to change how the GNU agreements were arrived at. That one comes from me, doesn't come from the meeting, but members can express their view. The link to this one, there's a proposal from the meeting, and I think we are agreeing to that when the minister comes, in our letter to him, we must include the fact that in his report, he must include how the DERCO has dealt with matters of international relations, taking into account a new reality. And the new reality is that you now have a GNU. Therefore, pre-GNU and post-GNU situations should be different. So the minister will then have to report to us on how he has been dealing with matters of DERCO, taking into account matters of the new reality that has been imposed on us. The next proposal is that on a monthly basis, there has to be discussions, reports, engagements on all G20 related matters which concern our portfolio committee. So I'm sure that's good. The committee agrees to that. There's another proposal here that we must make sure that in the reports that we are going to have and interrogate, the reports from DERCO, because we work based on the Constitution, and the Constitution talks about intergovernmental relations, and as a consequence of that, we have got Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act. When we get reports from the ministry, it must include reports on provinces, on local municipalities, metros, with regard to how they are dealing with matters of international relations. Now, I want to make the following additional two proposals, because I've made one already on the GNU. That in the constitutional review, honorable members, because it's going to happen next year again, and we lost an opportunity when we were doing the third-year review of legislative role in the democracy of South Africa as an arm of the state. We lost an opportunity there. I wrote a letter to the then speaker to say, maybe what should be done is that a year must be given to all committees to go to the ground and ask people of South Africa on what is their experience, what is the proposals with regard to the last 8 years on the role that has been played by Parliament, and how we can strengthen it and use an opportunity which is in the Constitution to then include some of the proposals to review the Constitution of the Republic based on what the people of South Africa will have said. So that opportunity is gone. But I think it's coming again, because next year, our Constitution will be doing 30 years. This Constitution was adopted in 1996. It is my suggestion, honorable members, that we suggest to the Speaker that there must be an agreement that as part of celebrating 30 years of South Africa's Constitution next year, we must use an opportunity that is in the constitutional review mandate, because it's in the Constitution. So you use the constitutional review, including the fact that you are doing 30 years, to then do a comprehensive review of the Constitution of South Africa, which will be more intense, with a committee broader than the one you have now, where the Constitution is going to be looked at, and it will not be 3 weeks like it is now. The Speaker should be able to pronounce now and say to the people of South Africa, next year, from March to the next March, there's going to be a constitutional review as part of celebrating our 30 years of the Constitution of South Africa. That one is my suggestion, honorable member, so that South Africa can know that every 30 years we have an opportunity to do thoroughgoing, intense, deep, drastic, if you want, review of the Constitution, so that it must demonstrate that it's a living document. 30 years is too long for you not to have thought of any change in the Constitution, because it must be a living document and conditions change from time to time. The last proposal from my side is that we must request Parliament through the Speaker to make permanent in the programming committee's program that our portfolio committee must be given the responsibility, which is standing, to do oversight on IR matters, particularly on matters of the economy, with special focus on the following. One, Africa, which means it will be the AU plus the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. 2, China. 3, US. 4, EU. 5, BRICS. And 6, UAE. What this means, honorable members, is that whilst we are expected to do the rest of the things, history has proven that the variables are not going to change that drastically. They may just move from one country to the next. But in terms of power, economic embeddedness, Africa, China, US, EU, BRICS, and UAE will continue to be very, very big role players in as far as geopolitics around the economy are concerned. So I'm suggesting that the committee must suggest to the Speaker that we should not be making requests to the chair of chairs to do oversight on these areas, but rather it must be scheduled by Parliament, which means that we will have ongoing discussions here, maybe on a monthly basis or quarterly basis on our own. On an ongoing basis, we focus on this whilst not ignoring the other countries' economies, and that no year must pass without us having gone to these 6 strategic areas to look at how South Africa relates with these areas in as far as matters of the economic diplomacy are concerned. Those are the suggestions, honorable members. Honorable Douglas. Honorable Powell.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just wanted to find out from you, each week our committee make inputs and we make a number of recommendations. And I haven't seen the committee reports containing these recommendations for a number of months. So I just wanted to find out if we could get an undertaking from your office that the recommendations dating back over the last number of committee meetings, at least for the previous term, be drafted and presented to us so that we can adopt those recommendation reports formally as the processes require in order for those items to be actioned. Because I am concerned that substantive recommendations are being made, but they're not being detailed in reports that are then presented to the committee for formal adoption. And it's very difficult to keep track of all of the various resolutions and recommendations without those detailed reports. So I would like to ask that those come to us within the next weeks so that we can formally adopt them. And then secondly, you and I have discussed this, and I'm very grateful that you've raised it yourself. But in the full year that we have been in the 7th Parliament, our minister has only accounted before this committee twice. Now, in various other committees, there is a huge amount of angst and unhappiness and upset when a minister misses a single committee meeting. And I'd like to impress upon you the urgency of both the Director General, Zane Dangor, and the Minister of International Relations accounting to this committee on at least a monthly basis, because our job is to exercise oversight of the executive. And it simply cannot continue that our foreign minister appears once or twice a year. So I'd like to ask not that you arrange for a once-off briefing or appearance from our foreign minister, but rather a standing slot. And if we need to move our meeting via engagements with the chair of chairs so that our portfolio committee meeting doesn't always clash with cabinet sitting on a Wednesday, then that's something that we must do. So those are my two detailed requests to you, Chair. One, please can we urgently receive the recommendations from all of our committee meetings so that we can adopt them for implementation? And secondly, can you please give us your assurance that it's not a once-off meeting with the foreign minister that will be arranged, rather a standing appointment that we can ask questions and have the level of accountability that is provided for in our rules. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Powell. Honorable Ngobile.
My hand was not up, Chair.
Okay. Honorable Kumbacha.
No, thank you, Chair. No, mine is just to support and welcome the recommendations you have outlined. And I think we can just attach timelines to in terms of us ensuring that they do happen, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Smith.
Nothing from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Smith. Honorable Muela. Thank you very much, Honorable Zuma Sambutla. Your hand is up, Honorable Douglas. Okay. Honorable members, if you remember, we had agreed, including in the last meeting, on what Honorable Powell is saying. All our recommendations have been sent to DERCO, so our correspondence to the minister on our next meetings for him to appear include those recommendations. Some of the recommendations have been sent to Parliament so that they constitute part of our reports to be, as committee, to be tabled in Parliament, and they've been adopted in Parliament. So I will request the administration that we package all our resolutions that we sent to Parliament that became part of our report, which were tabled and discussed and adopted in Parliament. That's one. Two, include the decisions that we have taken and have communicated to DERCO so that they can become one package. And as Honorable Powell is saying, retable them here in the portfolio committee, but also make sure that we are able to track their subsequent implementation. So that has been agreed in the past, so we are re-emphasizing that particular point. I'm trying to read, there's a chat here which I need to open. Sorry, Honorable members, I'm just trying to open the chats here. Okay, I saw what is on the chats. So that was the recommendation by Honorable Powell, in addition to other recommendations that are coming from the meeting. We have a proposal by Honorable Kumbacha for the adoption of the recommendations that are emanating from the meeting here. Do we have a seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ngobile. Do we have an objection? Okay. Thank you
Chairperson,
very
it's
much.
Honorable Powell.
Yes.
Chairperson, I don't object to the recommendations. What my interest is here is in following parliamentary process. I think we would all agree on a number of the recommendations. There are certain recommendations you've made that I don't agree with, but I don't want to overstep there. I'm sure if other members would like feedback on those matters, then that is their right. My concern here is in terms of ensuring that this committee follows proper process. We have not received minutes containing recommendations in a committee report for some time. My request to you is that the detailed resolutions and recommendations report that are included in the minutes need to be presented to this committee for formal adoption. That is a parliamentary requirement. That is what I'm asking. I have no problem with you sending DIRCO requests, sending other or Parliament requests. That's not a problem, but the rules of Parliament are very clear in terms of procedure, and we need to have that in a written report that is adopted with minority inclusions, edits, objections in the report that will then serve before Parliament. That is my contention here, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Powell. The proposal you made, Honorable Powell, which you are repeating now, is part of the proposal of today. So it's included in this proposal to adopt and seconding. So it's included there. So like I said earlier, we're going to work with the staff to bring all those things back to the committee. Those that were tabled in Parliament, actually before they went to Parliament, we discussed them in the committee and we adopted them. And there was a recording, as you say, according to the rules. Who is supporting, who is against, we did that. They were then tabled in Parliament. They were discussed in Parliament. They were adopted in Parliament. So there's an agreement that we must bring them as a package to the committee. We are going to do that. Secondly, there are recommendations which we have been making in each one of our meetings. They are in our minutes, and we have been adopting our minutes on a regular basis. We will be bringing them here as agreed. We will bring them, there's no problem. Those that relate to having to be referred to DIRCO, that has been done, and they are going to be included in what we expect the minister to report on as and when we meet. We had taken a decision in the past, honorable members, that we will prefer that there are substantive face-to-face engagements as part of accountability by DIRCO to the committee. And we had said in the last meeting, those standing meetings by the committee to make DIRCO accountable, the minister should be there in person. That was the decision, and that it has to be minimum must be once a quarter. So we have agreed that those dates are going to be standing. I can't remember whether we tabled those dates in the last or meeting before the last, but if it's not done, we'll do it next week, because those dates have been agreed to, and those dates have been communicated to the office of the minister. I spoke to him in person, including yesterday, regarding him having to come and appear before the portfolio committee, notwithstanding his international engagement, because in our discussions, his difficulty is that some of the engagements are not scheduled from his office. The president will, based on whatever he discusses with other member states, the president will either call him or send him a letter to say, man, in the next 72 hours or 24 hours, you have to just go to this country and so on. So I said to him, I sympathize with that reality, because he serves at the behest of the president, and DIRCO is a consequence of the powers vested in the Constitution in as far as the presidency is concerned, and therefore he has to take the mandate from the president and account to the president. So we've agreed that the minister will come in person, and if the president happens to send him on an agency basis somewhere, when we have already agreed on a date like the 18th, we've agreed with the minister on the 18th. It's agreed. It's discussed with him. And he got an instruction to go to the US when we had already agreed. So I said the minimum is that when we have agreed and there's an agreement between ourselves, and you happen to get an emergency directive to go elsewhere, let the DG come together with the two deputy ministers. So that's the arrangement for next week. But we are going to be, as the committee saying, on a quarterly basis minimum, and the minister has to appear in person, and that on a monthly basis, DERCO will account to the committee. It might be virtual or in person, but it's going to happen. Honorable members, I also requested the office to make sure that they track Parliament's program, because we will schedule a meeting and Parliament will, in 10 days, schedule something like what is happening today, so that we don't have to have our meetings and there's something else in the afternoon at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. So that when we meet with the department, with DERCO, it must be from 9 until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Honorable members, there's the recommendation and secondment of the recommendations coming from today's meeting, and there was no objection. Honorable Powell has emphasized the point which I think all of us are agreeing to, and I've explained how we are going to approach that point that she has raised. I want to thank Sanusha and Dr. Pelani Mtembu for the manner in which they have prepared and presented the quality reports to the committee here, to inform the committee, to strengthen the committee, to broaden our view, to deepen our understanding on IR matters as it relates to how we relate with DERCO relating with presidency, and other spheres of government in the Republic. It is these interactions that will continue to sharpen our understanding so that we can review some of the things which constitute history. Because history is there, yes, but if situations are that we need to review some of the things which were done in the past, we must review them so that we can have a better present and better future. So I want to thank you, Sanusha and Dr. Mtembu, for coming here on behalf of IGT, a reliable partner of the International Relations Portfolio Committee, to come and interact with us. Honorable members, this afternoon, go and enjoy your fiscal framework. This afternoon, there's some weather conditions which are not good in South Africa. You've seen what is happening in the Eastern Cape, the disappearance of aircraft in KZN, and we hope our families, wherever they are, we are keeping in touch with them to ensure that they are safe, and not only our families, but the rest of the people of South Africa. We must commend so far the emergency services of the following provinces: Western Cape, Eastern Cape, KZN, because that is where these conditions are adverse. And to be honest, our emergency services have been up to the task in those 3 provinces. Unfortunately, our people don't take some of the messages too serious. When they are informed not to travel, they still travel. People of South Africa were informed that they must avoid, especially those who are in the coast in the Eastern Cape, they must avoid traveling, but they traveled. And what is tragic is that very big companies also take the risk to transport goods to the coastal provinces, and within the coastal provinces, when they've been warned that there should be no traveling, they are putting the lives of people at risk. And those companies have got all the capacity to make sure that they assist in disseminating information and saving lives. But we have seen the big trucks that are stuck in the snow because they underestimated the messages that were being circulated. We can now see why in other countries where there are hurricanes and so on, even when governments inform people, some people decide not to heed the message. But we are happy that the majority of South Africans have heeded the message, and lives, many lives, have been saved. Those who are running NGOs, those constituency offices which are in those provinces which are adversely affected, you have our support. And those who can put a hand in giving whatever that must be consumed for people to survive, for them to be warmer. Let's do that to our constituency offices. The meeting is now closed. Honorable members, we will meet in the house.
Thank you, Chair.